Steve, what's it like to be the second most famous Steve/Steven related to Penn State right now?
Gosh, the second sounds high. I mean, I don't know.
That's true. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
first.
yeah.
I don't know. It's pretty cool. Have you been watching the Olympics? Have
I have, yeah, yeah.
you tuned in at the beach? You?
We did, and I'm happy, with the way it works. You can watch stuff live if you want, and then they tell me a story at night if I want to stick around for that. So I'm all good with that.
All right. Well, we're going to tell you a story here today on this podcast. It's called the Stuff Summer Says podcast with
Steve,
Steve. Um, I feel like we're in we're in the final sprint. Let's put this in Olympic terms. We are on the backstretch, if you will, or something. I don't know. Towards football season, and we kick it off with a great guest today. Author Chris Raymond joins us. He did a book called Men in White: The Gutsy Against All Odds Return of Penn State Football. Here's a copy of it if you're watching on the interwebs. It's a fantastic book. We spent some time with him talking about how he put this book together. And then what else are we gonna talk about? Oh, we're gonna talk about Media Day. And then Steve has Old Guy Young Guy. I'm a little anxious about Old Guy Young Guy because he said he had it handled, didn't float any topics, anything like that. So, anyways, all right, go ahead and listen to our interview with Chris, and we'll be back after this. Steve, we've officially hit the big time, and here's how I know we've officially hit the big time. We are getting advanced reader copies of books these
it's true.
days. That's how we know we're doing
Others
something
take
right.
note because it'll be worth it. Exactly. You're
Yes.
right.
Um,
Good call.
we are joined today by author who sent us one of his advanced copies, which we greatly appreciate. Chris Raymond. He wrote Men in White: The Gutsy Against All Odds Return of Penn State Football. Chris, how are you?
I'm good. Good, Darren. Thanks for having me
Yeah.
on.
All right.
And I'm good to know that the book has at least two people who have read it now. So we're off to a good start.
Yes, and it's great. It really is. And I do want to put out a disclaimer. Why I knew about this book is because I am a very small part of this book, maybe a couple interview lines of it, and then there's also a great picture of me in
Yeah.
there. So I appreciate you publishing that. But let's start here. You're not a Penn State beat writer, but you went to Penn State. You're a collegiate guy. Welcome to, or thank you for being a part of the club, I guess, if you will. Um, why did you want to write this book?
That's a great question. For me, I was there, as you said, I covered the team in the late 1980s. So I was there for like the Orange Bowl trip in 86 and the national championship season in 87. So I really saw the program in its heyday. Um, and I saw the impact that like Joe Paterno's success with honor had on those players that I, came in as freshmen with and what they were like when they left as seniors. And so, when I saw the news about Jerry Sandusky, yeah, I was like so many Penn State fans, just completely gutted by it. And I think for me, it was like horrifying to watch how fast that story kind of spin out of control. You had national media suddenly descending on Penn State and really kind of pushing for resolution, right? They wanted heads to kind of roll right away. And I think for any fan, you were kind of sitting here saying like, hey, wait, we want to get to the bottom of it too, but you want to know what really happened. And we didn't get that opportunity. And as a result of the heat, you didn't have people from the administration, people from the board of trustees really kind of standing up and defending the program in any way. So in that moment in 2012 when we flash forward and the NCAA hands down the sanctions, the fact that you have like Mike Motti and Mike Zordich and those seniors from that 2012 team like willing to kind of step forward and call a press conference on their own, which anybody who's covered Penn State football knows that doesn't happen, right? The fact they were willing to do that really, really struck a chord with me. I just felt like, wow, this is exactly what was needed at this time. And I thought they were just pitch perfect in the way they kind of defended the school, in the way that they said, like, look, one man didn't build this program. One man's not going to tear this program down. So it really struck a chord with me, like I said, and I'd always wanted to write a book. And I started thinking about that moment and then the Big Ten championship. And I was like, is there a way that you could, connect the dots from that moment in 2012 to that amazing come from behind victory in 2016 in the Big Ten championship game? And fortunately, it all worked out. And so the book kind of wrote itself once we got there. But that really was what the impetus was. Just as a Penn Stater, I wanted to kind of set the story straight and really sort of hold those guys up for the the heroism that they exhibited in coming forward and defending the university. That it was a very difficult time to do that.
You mentioned connecting the dots, and one of the things I enjoyed thoroughly about the book is the way you connected the dots. But for those who haven't read the book yet, and this is obviously coming out about a week before it comes out, um, it's an oral history. Um, why did you go that route as opposed to maybe a more traditional narrative, if you will?
Right. Um, Interesting. But I think, I really actually had to kind of make a point of that with my agent and with the editor of the book. It wasn't like pushed back a lot, but I really strongly felt like that was the way to go. And that was because, I hadn't covered the program for 30 some years. The players didn't know who I was, right? I, have a full-time job here in New York, so I wasn't able to pick me and my family up and pull up stakes and go to State College and really become the kind of fly on the wall and cover it in that way. And it's a really, really complicated story. So I don't know that there's any like one clear side. I didn't want to come through and say this is the absolute, story. So I felt it was important to kind of give the players the opportunity to kind of tell the story in their own words. And for me to be able to present it in a way where there are multiple voices, where there's multiple layers to the story, and you're hearing those voices. I'm not stepping in and saying anything. I tee them up at the start of each chapter. I do have moments where I step in and kind of put little transitions in there, but it really all comes right from the voices of the players, and I just felt like that was important to do that.
That's really practical and it makes sense, right? You talked about not pushback, but there's a confidence, right, for you that probably has to come with that, right? I mean, there's an to be able to say, I'm going to let them do this, and I'm able to put this story together through what they say. So while what you said is very pragmatic, there's some confidence that came with when you approaching this project on your part in some ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I had, many of the friends that I covered football with in the 1980s are still there, still covering the program. So I had some, people that could open some doors for me. And I had also done a little bit with oral history when I was at ESPN Books. We did one or two of them, and I love the forum. There's something about like taking those, I think for the most part, when you read an oral history, it's like people like hand the mic off and then you read a page story from somebody, right? A page and a half. And then hand the mic to the next person and you get the page and a half there. And I really, really felt strongly that there's a way to almost capture the TikTok of, those key moments in the games by going much shorter, really cutting those quotes down until they're almost like puzzle pieces, right? And then they kind of fit together really neatly. Because I would start off by basically just saying to the players, like, hey, just tell me your story. That was like the first, 20 minutes of any interview that I did. And it was interesting to see how often those themes repeated themselves. So for me, it was a matter of cutting the quotes down and then kind of piecing them together, and the themes kind of started to present themselves. I didn't know it was going to work out all the way through, but it really did. I mean, it was a lot of fun kind of putting the book together for that reason.
I read it as a 3-act play, if you will. You have the immediacy of right after Paterno gets fired, and really that summer on to the first season and a half of O'Brien, and then you kind of have the transition, and then you have the really 2016, the big crescendo year. But one of the things that I love that you did throughout the book is there's these little they're full chapters, and I don't want to call them asides, but they're almost sidebars, if you will. There's a great one about Saquon and kind of his recruitment, John Urschel. Um, do you? That's to me where the book shines. I think those are where I think maybe your interview skills probably came through. How hard was it to kind of get some of those conversations started, to get the off the beaten path stuff, if you will?
Right. I think those were themes that I wanted to get into the book because I felt like people needed to understand um, why Penn State fans like really admire the program so much, the things that are important to Penn State fans, and a lot of those were like things that Joe Paterno laid down. And so there were themes that I wanted to hit on. So you talked about John Urschel. It was about like this, amazing offensive lineman who was like a math whiz, right? And not just math whiz, he was like literally writing dissertations while he was playing football. So the idea about the importance of academics, was key. I feel like a lot of people didn't have any idea about like Penn State fans. How could you come back out and root for a team like this, right? For a program that's been through this. And I don't think people understand. They didn't understand like where that passion comes from for fans. And I felt like we needed to kind of explain that in the book. So, and there was another thing there that I wanted. I had people here, in New York asking me, I'm sure you did too. I'm sure Steve did as well. Like, how do you guys like, how do you revere a coach like Paterno so much? So it's like you lost your vision in some way, right? And I felt like people didn't understand. And I'm not sure that I got fully at this, but like I was explaining, if you grew up in the state of Pennsylvania, there were not politicians that you looked up to, right? I went looking for like who's the writer that was the moral force, right? It was John Updike, and he wasn't writing from a moral force, standpoint. You had to almost go back to like Ben Franklin to find somebody who actually laid down those sort of moral guidelines, right? And spoke up for the people of Pennsylvania. Joe Paterno was that person. He wanted to be more than a football coach. And for people who grew up, in these coal regions and the steel regions and saw how much the state, descended or started to, the pain that people were going through in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like to have a Ivy League educated coach come in and say, like, we're going to win football games and we're going to do it the right way. To have somebody that's going to say, we just won a national championship, I want to use that as a chance to go out and improve the library system. Like that gave people all in every corner of the state reason to kind of like that program and admire that person, and really the reason to kind of feel good about yourself and where you're coming from, what we stood for. And so I wanted to be able to get those moments, right? Those thoughts into the book. And so those little like interludes were the way to do that. And I also, you talk about the thirds, I knew that, the 2012 season, lots of ground to cover there, lots of drama there. The 2016 season, tons of drama there. I had to figure out a way to get 2013, 2014, and 2015 in there. And there's a lot of like pain, a lot of losing in there. And that's where I wasn't sure whether I would be able to kind of connect the dots. But like I said, when I started cutting the quotes and putting them together, like the pieces all fit together, and those asides really fit in, and they were nice little, moments, I think, in between what was a lot of hard knocks, right? Difficult lessons in the middle of the book.
Is there somebody that was in there, or a story that was in there that you didn't think was going to be like, if you'd have thought about this, you're like, I guess I'm thinking Urschel's math professor, right? Like, as I'm looking through this book, I'm like, of all the people I expected to see in this book, it's probably not that guy, but he makes sense because of how it played out. Like, were there some of those that you didn't expect to get to that ended up working, or how did that play out?
I think, I knew I wanted to surprise people with some of the voices in it. It wouldn't have worked if it was just purely football players, and it wouldn't have worked if it was just purely coaches. So I wanted to kind of get some perspectives. I went to Darien because I wanted to kind of show what it was like for people in the stands, right, watching these games, and what they were seeing when they were watching these players. So I knew that I wanted to go, and get. I knew I wanted to do something on the books and Urschel. It's just hard not to kind of see that. I think at the end of the day, I had my son was very young at this point. It was like 11 or 12, I think, when this story broke in 2011 and 2012. He hadn't become a Penn State fan yet, but it was very soon after the fact that he suddenly took an interest. And I remember, one late November, early December one year said to me like, "Hey, I want to go to a game now." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, how are we going to go to a game in like December, And then just like purely out of chance, the bowl ban gets rescinded. They get an invitation to the Pinstripe Bowl, and it's literally like four train stops away from where we live in New York. And I took him to that game, and he became like a madman. Like overnight, he just was like getting the fans all worked up. Just fell for the team. And to see the kinds of players that they had after that, like a guy like Christian Hackenberg, a guy like Saquon Barkley, a guy like John Urschel, a guy like Grant Haley, a guy like Trace McSorley, like those are people you could rally behind, and the people that, you want your kids to kind of look up to and admire. So, I wanted to kind of get that idea into the book as well.
Yeah, it came across. I thought Spider Caldwell and his wife, right?
Yeah.
Like the behind the scenes stuff there about the uniforms. And for me reading it, I went to the Roar rally or whatever it was, like when they first went out and practiced. And you got to that feeling of all this stuff that that didn't feel like a rehash, and it felt like, hey, that's what I lived. Like that what we're getting through the voice of these people is what I live. So I think that for me was it was hard to put it down. If you're a Penn State fan, it's hard to put it down because it's there and it feels like it's right because that's the part that I lived of it anyway.
And that's one of the advantages I think I had is I had some distance from, from it in the way that you guys did not, and a lot of the sports writers did not have there. There was, I mean, that story was just breaking news every single day, right? It was just took everything, I think, just to kind of cover all the angles that were happening. And it's easy to kind of lose sight of the larger story. And I knew, that I would, if I could sort of tell that larger story, like I said, connecting the dots, I thought there was a lot there. I'm surprised a little bit that nobody else, was there. You know what I mean? I was kind of searching to see if anybody had a book deal to do something like this because I was like, this is big. There's a lot, and not just big, but like inspiring. You know, in 2011, it was hard to imagine you could ever come up with an inspiring story, tied to Penn State football. And it was because of those players stepping forward that you suddenly had it. And as you started to look at them more closely and the way that people rallied around them, I talked to Letterman and they were, kind of saying, for them, it was, this is like 50 years of history. There's not a Letterman club in most of college football that has, 50 years worth of players that all went through the same exact experience playing for Joe Paterno, right? So it's a tight knit group, and they wanted somebody to kind of step forward and defend the program. So when they saw that, they were like, they wanted to kind of rally around it. And those are the moments that I think really sort of carry the book in a lot of ways. It's more than just and the players nodded to that too, how important that sort of fan base, that fan support was, how important the Letterman support was, how important the alumni support was for them.
You talk about the alumni support and particularly from the Letterman support. I think probably the best chapter in the book, or at least my favorite chapter in the book, is the Charlie Mike chapter, kind of with the emotional story there. Can you just tell those listening a little bit about that chapter and why you chose to include that and why you found that story so powerful?
Right. I don't know if you guys have seen the Saving the Roar documentary about that 2012 season, but Rick Huck-Slater is like really one of the stars of that documentary, and it is for this speech that he gave to the 2012 team. And this is a guy that had been in the Navy, had been in the Navy SEALs program, finished up his tours of duty, came to Penn State, walked onto the football program. In his own words, he basically had one play in his entire career, but he was just one of those guys that like brought it every single day. He understood what a special place it was to be and how special those players were around him. And it really kind of left a lasting impact on him. And then after 9/11, when he saw what happened, he saw the terrorist attack on the U.S., he felt compelled to kind of go back into the Navy, join the Navy SEALs, and ended up doing like another, 3 or so tours of duty. But when the Sandusky news broke and Bill O'Brien was trying to find ways to rally the players, he invited Rick Huck-Slater to come back and speak to the players. And he was actually supposed to be heading off to Australia to be embedded, with soldiers that were going to Iran and Iraq or Afghanistan, sorry. And he, hopped on a plane because they said, really, we need you, and came to campus and delivered this remarkable speech to the players. And it really was, they had heard so many other people kind of talking to them and trying to kind of tell them, here's what's special about it. But this guy is telling them that, there's no reason why you should stay here, right? Might well be on a sinking ship. But, when that happens and push comes to shove, you kind of have to sort of, find the inner force to come forward, right, and do the right thing and fight for the program. And so he gave them those like call letters, Charlie Mike, which means continue the mission. And I think he is just such a dynamic, intense speaker that the players really like. I think they were surprised when they first saw him because they didn't look like all that much, but after he started speaking, he had their full attention right away, and that became their rallying call for the rest of the season, Charlie Mike. And one of my first interviews was with Spider Caldwell. And he just did a phenomenal job of like literally, he's like, let me show you how this whole thing works. He descends the stairs and they're all looking at him like, who is this crazy guy? And he does this thing. He reaches out and takes out his wallet and he puts it down on the lectern. And he takes out his keys and he puts those on the lectern. And then he, takes some pieces of paper and he sets those down. And everybody's kind of watching him. And then he just says, gentlemen, I'm glad to be here. And they had their full attention at that point. He didn't have to speak very loud. He didn't have to say too much. It's just like he is that kind of dynamic person. He brings that sort of intensity. And I knew like after Spider did that, I was like, that's a scene in the book. I have to kind of go and talk to some other people about what happened, what that speech was like.
Where did you start in the interview process? I mean, you mentioned Spider being one of your first interviews. There's a ton of names in here. Where did you start?
I got really fortunate. I had a couple of people said to me, you want to talk to Von Walker and Greg Garrity. And so it was interesting that I actually started talking to the run-ons, and the stuff that I got from them was like, oh my God, we have to do a whole chapter on run-ons and, what that whole experience is like. So I started there, and then I was lucky to get Craig Fitzgerald very early on too, the trainer for the team. I think he reached out to Mark Brennan, my friend Mark Brennan, to kind of see whether I was legit or not. Unfortunately, Mark was like, yes, he's somebody you should talk to. And I think once I talked to Craig and then Spider, anybody that was sort of wondering like, hey, should I talk to this guy? What should I do? Like, was able to kind of talk to one of those two people and be like, okay, yes, if we talk to them, then he's legit. We're willing to kind of talk. So that's really what got it underway.
That's awesome.
Was there anybody you couldn't get? Or that you had to rely on in other stuff to way to find their stuff somehow?
Yeah, I never got to talk to Saquon, and that's a guy that I would like to have, to had a chance to talk to him. I didn't talk to Matt McGloin, but those are two guys that were also, spoke, in a lot of press conferences, in a lot of there's a lot of material that I was able to find online. All those press conferences are, there's transcripts from those. There's tons and tons of clips of interviews from the locker room and the hallways, under the stadium. And I mined like all of that stuff. So there's not a voice that I wasn't able to get into the book. But that's it. I think it was funny with Matt, and I get this. I think that, for Matt and, some of those players that were behind that Saving the Roar, they saw the book a little bit as like maybe competition. And again, they don't know me. I haven't covered the team for 30 years. So I wasn't surprised that some players were not, willing. I was remarkably fortunate in other ways. I had a friend from my days at ESPN who, when he saw that I had the book deal, reached out to me. He was like, would you like to talk to Trace McSorley? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I live in Virginia. I just saw his dad at the pizza place tonight. I was telling him about the book. You want to call him and see what he would do. And then I was able to get like Garrett Sickles early on, and he was like, I think, talked to Christian Hackenberg on my part. So I was able to get those two quarterbacks. And I really think I was often running there, and I was really sort of surprised at the time they took to talk to me. And what they shared. I was not trying to kind of make this a salacious book in any way. It really was about like trying to tell their stories. But I feel like it just reinforced for me the fact that you're talking about high character guys here. You're talking about very smart guys here. And I think with some hindsight, they were able to kind of look at what they went through and give me a pretty clear-eyed picture of what that experience was like for them. And they didn't really have to kind of point fingers. I mean, it was easy. The bad guys in this were like the recruiters, right? That sort of descended on the campus right after sanctions were handed down. It is, I think, the NCAA decision. I think that it may be a noble idea to kind of say players could transfer, right away without, any questions. But the way that came down, with recruiters suddenly descending on campus, you had, basically 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who had just been through hellacious like 2011, right? And then finally got a new coach in Bill O'Brien and had a very strong winter. And I think they felt like, okay, we've weathered the storm. And like in an instant, all of that was up in flames. And they were being preyed upon, I think, by a lot of these recruiters. And it had to be hard because you're basically sitting there saying, hey, this is my team, my teammates, but you're looking across the table and saying like, that guy says he's staying, but is he really going to stay? Is there going to be a program here? And that had to be some intense soul searching for the 48 hours, I think, after that announcement came down.
Was there something throughout the book? There were a couple spots throughout the book that I was like, "Oh yes, I completely forgot about that moment." The Paterno people comment from O'Brien is a good example of that kind of. It was, but that was a big deal. But were there a couple moments throughout the interview process, throughout the writing process, that you were like, "Wow, I didn't know that," and this changes the story, or this is such a unique fact I have to include it in there.
I think it was some of the, that comment I made to you about the Letterman, club. I knew that how big and important it was at Penn State, but it wasn't until I think it was Lydell Sargent that said to me, like, you have 50 years worth of guys that have gone through the exact same experience. You're not going to find that in another college football program. And that bonds those guys, really deeply bonded them. You had players that came after, now who've had either Bill O'Brien or, James Franklin, but still like the longest stretch of history for that program, you had guys who were under one coach and so went through the exact same thing. And I think that really, really resonated with me. Um, I I think I kind of suspected going into this that that social media played some role in it, but it was really kind of driven home to me, like how, you forget that this is, this story breaks in 2011, right? The iPhone had only been around for like 3 years, right? Twitter was really just like a brand new thing at that point. But suddenly you had, people all over the country kind of weighing in on what happened here, I think Audrey Snyder was telling me she, writes for The Athletic now, but she was a reporter there. She had just gotten her phone and was like on the front lawn of Paterno's front lawn with all the people that are kind of waiting to kind of see what happened and whether he was going to come out. And she had pulled her phone out and kind of shot video, one of the first times she shot it. And she had people from like national media offering her all kinds of money for that video, So I think that people forget, there was something, and I experienced a little bit of it because I did this, very short piece for Esquire magazine, the website on, a friend of mine reached out and said, like, do you want to write about this? It was like really in the hours right after it broke. And I was like, the only thing I felt was that, you know, um, Joe Paterno maybe didn't quite live up to the, I don't know that like the guy that I knew in the late 80s would have accepted, like I kicked it upstairs and I went back to work, didn't kind of follow through on it. And I think he even sort of says as much. I wish I had handled it a little bit differently. So I wrote a piece just saying like he didn't quite live up to his own standard, but really if you toss all of this out, the whole program, everything Paterno did, the whole idea of success with honor, it would be a huge tragedy. Um, and I got so much like, pushback from that I was, afraid to kind of come forward again, right? And say I'm a Penn State fan. And I talked to friends who said that you couldn't wear the caps, you couldn't wear the sweatshirts. And I think that is really, that's because of that sliver of time, because how big social media had suddenly become, and because people could kind of weigh in, and because the national media descended and, covered this almost like a war. It was almost like an invading army, right? That was sort of covering it at a time when I think the students and the faculty members were sort of trying to wrap their head around this still and say kind of what happened. And I think that social media just added huge fuel to the fire there. So that I think was the big lesson.
Um, all right, I wanna ask one question before we kind of get out of here. But I think the one of the most interesting parts of the book is the transition period from O'Brien to Franklin, and like particularly after the 2015 season, kind of there's almost animosity amongst the players, and then it kind of all clicks because Naeem Workman stands up. Sorry, not to spoil the book, but that's
Yep, that's fine.
effectively what happened. Um, I'm curious from your perspective, doesn't cover the program but wrote this book. Could you maybe compare or contrast Bill O'Brien and James Franklin in the leaders that they are?
Yeah, and I think it's important to see, to look at historically what it's like to kind of replace a legend as a coach, right? I think Nebraska's still trying to figure that out. Florida State may have it like figured out now, but it took a long, long time. So for Penn State to kind of choose Bill O'Brien as the next head coach and to get that so right, I think Craig Fitzgerald was the one that told me this. Like, this is a first time head coach in Bill O'Brien, and he didn't make one wrong decision in 2 years. You know, he had to make some really huge decisions. Do you take the names off the backs of or put names on the backs of the uniforms? Um, that's probably like the biggest one there, but like he was making like real-time decisions, and he was just like had his finger on the pulse of that team. He had to kind of decide, am I going to let the players, step forward and do this press conference and, listen to them? How much am I going to? So I think that was a really remarkable thing that they just got that right the first time. I think that they did get the Franklin call right as well, but at that point you had players who had been through Paterno. They had really had to step forward and kind of take charge in a way under O'Brien, and he let them, lead the way. But they were the ones that really kind of came forward, like I said, and said like, hey, we're not going to let this program fail. We're going to put ourselves out there. We're going to say we're going to support it, and we're going to take whatever heat comes with that. And so I think by the time James Franklin comes along, you have guys that are like more than a little invested in that program. It's their program, And so he comes in and tries to put his stamp on it right away. And Bill O'Brien was a guy that basically said, as long as you come in here and, you tend to your business, right? You get, the grades right, and you do your job on the football field, I'm going to let you go. There's that sort of famous scene, I think, where, one of the players in the first introduction to him, the first meeting with him, is like, he raises his hand and wants to know, like, can we have beards or not? Because Joe Paterno wouldn't let players have beards, So I think the fact that he like loosened up on those things like really went far with those players. And then you have, James Franklin came in and he had built programs by basically saying, I'm going to make Vanderbilt football special and make people want to come here. And so of course he's going to come in and try and put that stamp on the program. But for these guys, I think a lot of those players felt like he was selling a program that didn't need to be sold, right? They had already rescued it to some degree, right? They had already it already had this deep history, and they had all bought into that history. And so I think they were a little bit reluctant. And then when you had, you didn't see the results right away on the football field. You had people kind of questioning, well, what Bill O'Brien brought in here worked for us, and now you're, asking us to do something that's not working at all. And I think part of that is like the growing pains, but there's also a part that, Bill O'Brien inherited a team that had a lot of NFL players on it, a ton of talent on it. And James Franklin inherited a team that like didn't have an offensive line. He had to find a way to kind of create an offensive line, overnight. So those tensions were there, I think, early on with the players. I don't think they quite knew what to make of James Franklin. Certainly older players. I think the players that he brought in were like, they loved him. Trace McSorley. I think Saquon kind of loved him right off the bat. But some of the older players kind of said to me, like, there were people who had their noses bent out of shape a little bit, and had they kind of bought in a little bit earlier, we might have had some more success there in 2015. So I think that's really what the big difference is between those two guys. I think part of it has to do with timing. Part of it has to do with their style.
Makes sense. Anything else you want to add about the book before we get you out of here with a couple quick questions, Chris?
I think those like questions you guys asked were great. I'm trying to think about, I think we sort of covered like the tick that was in it.
So
I think the one thing I would want to say is just there are some like really remarkable moments in there, and I was fortunate to kind of be able to write about that 4 overtime win against Michigan. And certainly when you go back and ask people, you look at it with hindsight, like Saquon Barkley was there as a recruit in that game. Mike Gesicki was there as a recruit in that game. I think Jason Kabinda was there as a recruit in that game. So it's just like that was a monumental victory for them to have at that point in time. And I think you saw the wins against Michigan at the end of the season in 2012 and 2013 were like very crucial. So part of what I loved about this was there's like I think the players brought a lot of grit to this. I think they brought a lot of like dedication to it, but there's a certain kismet that is really remarkable. How does a guy, an otherworldly talent like Saquon Barkley, end up on Penn State's campus at that point in time? How do you end up going from like Matt McGloin to Christian Hackenberg to Trace McSorley? You know what I mean? Like 1, 2, 3. So I think that was the thing that I really loved when I started looking at that and playing with that a little bit. It's just like, yeah, how does these guys end up on this campus? Not only are they bring like unique, remarkable like talent to the position, but they're also just like, you could not watch Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley in 2016 and just like smile from ear to ear. You know what I mean? They couldn't not put them on TV because how could you not love that team that come from behind the way they rallied game after game? You know, it was good for not just Penn State. I think it was great for like the game of college football to have players like that performing at that level and then sort of coming out and smiling for the cameras and doing those interviews.
Go ahead, Steve. I know. Did you have?
No, go ahead. Go to your speed
Okay.
round. I'm
All
good.
right. We're gonna get to the speed round. So usually when we have a Penn Stater on, we like to ask 3 questions, get you out of here quickly with them, but we'll go through them. All right. Your go-to creamery ice cream flavor.
Oh, chocolate chip mint, no
Ooh,
question.
all right. All right. That's a good one. You are the czar of Penn State sports for one day and one day only. What change are you making?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Uh, I don't know that I have a quick answer for that. I think it's just like, no, I think it's more kind of reinforcing what I said earlier. I mean, I worry a little bit now that the money has gotten so big in the game. I think that's kind of what you have to do. But I would want to do everything I could to kind of preserve that notion of like success with honor, right? Doing it the right way.
Okay. Okay. And last question. You're back in State College for one night and one night only. What bar are you walking into?
I'm going to Cafe 210 West.
All
It's a
right.
little like slower, I think, for the students there, but my guy J.R. Mangan that runs the place grew up a few doors down from me in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, and so nothing beats like sitting out there in front of Cafe 210 West with a iced tea, Long Island iced tea in the middle of summer.
That is yes. I've always said that there's like a Pavlovian response anytime like it's like April or May and it's just like the perfect day out and you just want to go sit there and then you're stuck in the real world.
Absolutely.
All right, Chris, where can everybody find the book? I know you're doing a couple signings throughout the state. This is your time to shine and plug the book.
Yeah, it comes out on August 13th, Tuesday, August 13th. It will be available wherever books are sold. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble online. You can buy it in any retail store nationwide. And I will be signing that night, August 13th in Harrisburg. And then coming back to Williamsport on the 17th, the morning of the 17th, Scranton in the evening of the 17th, or sorry, afternoon of the 17th. And I will be in State College at the Barnes and Noble on September. I'm sorry, on 1 week later than that, right? The 24th, August 24th.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed the book.
Steve, the thing I appreciated about the book the most, Chris didn't insert himself, and he annotates. He is very much the third party narrator, and I don't know if anybody else could have quite done that had they been on the beat the way some of the other people we've had, because he brought back and found things and had the ability to take the time to put all of the story together. And it, for an oral history, it truly has a rising action, climax, and then like closing plot, complete like true story to it type arc. And I really appreciated that about the book. And I appreciate it was a great conversation with him. He really explained a lot of kind of what I wanted to know, that as I'm reading him, I was like, oh, I should ask Chris this, should ask Chris this. Thought that was great.
Yeah, he mentioned that he was surprised that no one else was planning a book, or when he did the research, like nobody else had an agreement to do a book. And I think he was the right person for this job because he wasn't right on top of it. He knew it well enough to know what it was doing, knew the right people to do it. He's an editor. There's a lot of his work has been as an editor. Not that he can't write; he writes really well. But I thought the oral history decision, it was interesting that he made that from the start because he thought that was how it was going to work best, and it did. Um, and his ability, for me, it hit me when we were talking to him. And this is for people my age, and maybe you. I don't see this. Like there's now 2 quintessential Penn State football books you have to read. There's The Road to Number One, which was
Mm-hmm.
Ridge Riley with the forward by Joe Paterno, and there's this, right? Like I think this this captured everything that I experienced as a fan, the moments, whatever else, but it wasn't overbearing, it wasn't preachy, it wasn't whatever. It just shared the story and did it well.
I think, and maybe this is why you appreciated that book. It's somewhere on this bookshelf. I know I have that book
Yeah,
somewhere.
I know you have it somewhere too.
Um, um, but I think the reason it's funny to hear you say that, because this is my college years. Like this book is quite literally
Mhm.
2012 is my first Penn State football season, all the way up until 2015 and 2016. I still had a lot of friends in college, and like this is and I think that was one of the other things that I really appreciated about this book was like personally, selfishly, I enjoyed that. But I think if you were not at in-state college or going to a lot of games or were just a fan at the time, you're going to get so much out of this book that like we're not just really saying this. You're going to want to read this book. There are moments in this book it's, oh my god, I can't believe I forgot about that. The Paterno people comment from O'Brien is a great example of that. There's a couple of things I didn't flat out know. I mean, you know, everybody knows that I was a big Akeel Lynch fan. He almost went to Iowa, which is like hilariously funny for Akeel because Iowa and I don't get along very well. Um, there's a lot of little moments in there that I really appreciated, and like I said, the other thing I really appreciated is all the little sidebar stories. That's really what actually to me made this book, because you know everything that kind of happens in the games per se, but you don't necessarily know. You mentioned the Spider and his wife. The chapter about the names on the back of the jerseys and
Yeah.
Spider's wife. It was, if you've ever had a conversation with Spider, and I've had one conversation in my life with Spider, it was everything that you would get out of that conversation with Spider. And it was like, it was kind of an emotional story. Like it was very sweet, and you can see the passion that people have for Penn State that work for the football program.
Yeah, I just think all that stuff. There were a couple things I didn't know, but the stuff that I did know was validated, right? Like it was like, oh man, these players they aren't getting along with the new coach, right? And I mean, you kind of knew that it
Yeah.
was kind of hinted at, but this is a safer place for them to talk about it. So, and I remember, I mean, I was a candidate at the Collegian when Chris was the sports editor, I forget which fall, and I remember vividly being in the classroom before the candidate test and him talking about how he covers football, and you're looking for details. Like maybe you're going to see that guy on the sideline with his fingers taped and you're curious about why that happened. Like those are the kind of things you need to know about. So that through line of Chris as a detail and reporter and editor carried through for me from that point to now. The guy we talked to looked a little different, a little older, right? But the same guy, right? Same attention to detail and good storyteller. So yeah, it's a really good book,
I think,
and I'm glad he made time.
yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think the the most interesting part, I think, to me overall of the book is Hack. I feel like Hack is a central character in this book a lot more, and I was surprised. There's really try to seek out this book and read a copy of it. The other thing we were saying is it's a quick, like it's 430ish pages, but it's a quick read because of the pace to the book, and that was I really appreciated that as well. So yeah, go buy Chris's book. It was great. All right, anything else? How many years ago was that? Was that was
1987, probably.
you're getting old.
Spring.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a while ago. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. All right, moving on. Do you want to talk? Anything Olympics you want to discuss? Or have you? You said you watched the Olympics. Have you been enjoying?
Nothing Penn State specific yet. I mean, I guess I'll be more interested in the wrestling. And then there's been Penn State, Joe
Yes.
Kovacs, right? The great throw at the end.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it would be more media related. Like, I think the beating up the guy on the 100-meter call that he's gotten beat up for like calling the wrong dude, it was really close. Even the runners thought that Noah Lyles didn't think that he had won right after the
Yeah.
race. So to beat up the play-by-play guy for getting it wrong, like I think that's been a big overreaction
Oh,
in
see,
terms of media stuff.
I think I I don't know. I don't know. I think that's the moment of track and field for the whole games. It's the moment
It
of the
is.
track and field for the next 4 years. You will not watch anything. Think about track and field for the next 4 years.
So does he have to wait until it's official
I
then, right?
I instead of him declaring a winner, I want him to say, I think it might have been
Fair.
Thompson, but it could have been Lyles. Like give me a shred of doubt. And he was so quick to declare, and it was not obvious to me. And the other thing was it was really weirdly delayed, and Noah Lyles starts celebrating, and we don't see those times or the times come through. I don't know. I had a gripe with that. Um,
I think NBC, we saw it live and then we saw it later. And
did
NBC did a good job later by not changing it. They showed you how it happened, showed you the live call,
okay.
less that you listen to the live call, and then gave you the supporting interviews more quickly than
Okay.
happened in real life, which made it better. See, yeah, I guess a shredded out would have been good, but I just to my mind there was like it looked like doubt because like I guess I wasn't surprised that it wasn't him because it was just so damn close.
All right, all right,
But you're right. Every four, if it's one call for every
all
4 years,
right.
maybe he
Just
should have just had that in his mind and saying,
yeah.
okay, let me be sure about this before I say it, which is fair too.
Um, I've thoroughly enjoyed the beach volleyball, the indoor volleyball. I wish we could get more volleyball on TV. I forgot how much I enjoy volleyball. Um, I've been sucked into the surfing. The surfing is very relaxing to watch. It's going to finish up tonight. Um, I'm trying to think what
Did you
else
see
is
the
going
social media love from men's volleyball at Penn State, the men's volleyball camp,
Yes,
sending a
well,
shout out to
oh,
the which was
and
very
Pav
nice.
got a shout out today on the
Yep,
broadcast, so
yep.
I'm happy for Pav. So yeah, I mean those three have kind of been carrying the team in a lot of ways. So yeah. I don't know. I think the cool thing about the Olympics is like there's Aaron Brooks and Aaron Russell and like athletes that like we know about see, and then there's LeBron, and in the eyes of like the Olympics, they're all the same, right? Like it's they're all just Olympians,
That's right.
and I think
Yep.
that's neat to see. Um, so okay, I was just curious if you were plugged into the Olympics. All right, let's talk about things that matter a little. Well, they does matter, but matter a little more to us, and that's Penn State football. Um, kind of a boring media day. Really, the only story about media day or from media day happened before, and that's Kevon Kevion Keys and Jameel Lyons getting suspended and now essentially removed from the team. I don't think they're in the student directory anymore
Yep.
either. Um, that's really the only like interesting tidbit or drama kind of that came out of media day. Um, the other things that stood out to me, I think there was an interesting quote from Franklin about Andy Kotelnicki and like we're gonna do some crazy stuff. Effectively, was what he was saying. I thought that was interesting. More of the wide receiver narrative being, I don't want to say pushed because that's not the correct term, but being talked about. Um, a, a very, it felt at times maybe a little more subdued, or there wasn't really anything that interesting for media day.
And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like you're trying to win football game. Like you don't want drama. Like at
No.
this point, if you're a fan and you're hoping the team wins games, this is not the time when you want drama. You want everybody on the same page, figured out, going about it. And I don't know how organized or not the media day was or how it played out for the people that were there, but in terms of what resulted from it, no news is kind of good news, I think, if you're a fan.
Yeah. Um, but I think I am feeling, at least, and maybe it's because I'm going to write about Penn State football this week, and like we're kicking off like kind of our push towards football season this week. I've at least I've started to feel excited about Penn State football a lot more than I have been, and I know I probably have said that every week on the podcast for the last like 10 weeks, but I think maybe the Olympics were distracting that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I still kind of everything still feels the way I felt. Like a lot of this just feels like a wait and see year. Like, and that's hard, and maybe that's like really kind of flying in the pace because you want instant gratification these days. But that's kind of where I'm at on this season. Like somebody
Yeah.
asked me what my record prediction was, and like I don't know, and I probably won't know until I tell you.
Right. And there's just no big excitement at the start, right? Like everybody's talking
Yeah.
well, a little bit. It just feels like such BS about how tough West Virginia is going to be. Now, again, no disrespect. Well, yes,
Ooh,
disrespect
there
to
it
West
is.
Virginia.
There it
Sorry,
is.
sorry. It just should not be. They should go down there and win, and then they come home and they win 3 dog home games or whatever it is. 4 they play, whatever it is. 4 of them they play in September before they start playing a real game. So that's for me. It's hard to get excited because I don't see, man. If there's a challenge in this early part and they stumble, that's not a good thing.
Right. Well, right. Then that kind of goes to the point I'll probably write this week. Um, I think the other thing that's interesting to me, there's not really like there hasn't been a storyline. Like we've talked about the storylines, and a lot of those deal with like the fan engagement of like when the whiteout's going to be, when like or the new teams joining the Big Ten. Like there isn't a quarterback battle because the last year of Sean, you had Sean versus Drew, who should start, and you had a little bit of a battle, even if it was dead set on Drew, and maybe it was more so what's Drew going to do last season going into the season. This year, it's really just like what's this wide receiver room going to be like? I think that's maybe why it felt like there was a little bit of a void. Like I don't. This isn't me knocking any writer or anything I've read. I didn't read anything that was like earth shattering this weekend.
No, there's no angst to be created. There's no
Yeah.
drama yet. It'll happen on the football field in week 5 or 6
Okay.
at some point.
So UCLA, USC.
I don't even, I'm just
You're
making
just
up weeks.
that
I
was
know
just
it's not
the
the first. I know it's not
okay.
the
I
first
thought
4 weeks of the
all
season.
right, all right. I thought that was like
No,
okay.
no.
Yeah, that's about it. Penn State football wise this week. Anything else there?
Okay. So you ready for old guy, young guy? You mean?
Yeah.
I think this is just going to truly skew me old, and you're just going to mock me. So I think you should be happy about this.
Okay.
So imagine imagine you're at the beach. Imagine all the forms of transportation that exist at the beach. There's walking, there's golf carts, there's bicycles, there's cars and trucks, there's those one wheel skateboard things,
The
whatever
hoverboard.
else.
Yeah.
You know, I'm curious, which do you think of those modes of transportation are supposed to be happening on the sidewalk?
Ooh, this is an interesting question. You're at the beach.
Paved roads all the way around, paved roads and sidewalks where we were.
How can let me ask this question, like, because there's a difference between the paved roads in like LBI versus the paved roads in like Ocean City, Maryland. Like, whatever, the Atlantic Highway there, whatever in Ocean City, Maryland. That's busy. Like, I would not. I think a sidewalk is okay to ride the bike on there.
Okay, not that busy.
Then I think you should be in the street for pretty
Okay.
much everything, besides walking, obviously. And maybe that hoverboard thing, just because that feels. Why?
Just the bicycle. I don't mind the people walking on the street, right? Because some places there aren't sidewalks. We were in the Outer Banks, right? Right along. We were oceanside, not oceanfront. Not that matters. But like, there's no sidewalk on the main
Yeah.
side street that goes along the beach. So people walk. I wish they'd learn to walk against traffic so they could see what's going on. Because again, old guy things, see the traffic coming at you. But the bicycles on the sidewalk, like the road is totally empty. There's not that many cars, and there's a lot of people with dogs and kids and families walking sidewalks. And you got bicycles. I'm like, that's the decision you're making?
On the sidewalk.
Slide.
You're right
Yes,
about.
like yeah, like don't be playing chicken with the family. Get your little beach coaster bicycle out on the street.
I don't disagree with you there. Like, I feel like if you're at like even there's parts of like Rehoboth and Bethany Beach that are like this, where it's like it's very residential. There's maybe one car every 20 minutes to go
Right.
down it. Like, in theory, like the bikes and non-car vehicles should own the streets there. Like Florida does.
See?
There's places in Florida that do that well. So
Right. See, there you go. It's
congratulations.
not as bad as you thought I was. See?
You've won. You've won this argument. If
There
there
you
is
go.
a winner.
That's old guy, young guy.
Okay. All right. All right. Hold on, I gotta pull up a file here because I want to make sure I'm accurate on everything as I sit here and tell you about things. Okay. I have this year's August calendar pulled up, ready to go. So we're gonna release a podcast tomorrow. Then Thursday we will start with the preview series. I'm gonna start with we're gonna do the same order this year: offense, defense, and then a coaching preview. The next 3 weeks. We're probably doing a podcast. Well, I think we are doing a podcast next Monday because we have a pretty good guest for that one. The 14th, it's a big day. That's when Stuff Part 2 comes out, year 2.
Nice.
Excited about that. The 19th, we'll do the flashcards. People liked those last year. We did flashcards on the website. So you can learn like a number and a name, and kind of associate the roster a little bit better. And then I have us penciled in on the 27th for our season preview episode, coming out on the 27th. We'll put out a depth chart. There will be a season preview, and then a West Virginia preview, and then it's off to football season. And I'm sure Steve has some smatterings of stuff he's going to throw in there as well.
He will. The rants will begin soon.
What we're saying is there's a lot coming. Pay attention. We hope you read it. We hope you watch. We hope you listen. We thank you for reading, watching, and listening. We had a really good month last month, like website numbers wise, and we didn't publish a lot. So I appreciate everybody that's Googling and then clicking on our links and then making our links go higher up the page. So yeah. Anything else on the homework?
No, we'll keep it up, and they can keep it up. That'd be
Okay,
great.
there you go. All right. So all of that, plus this podcast and everything else, you can find at our website. It's called stuffsummersays.com. On that website, there's a section called with
Steve.
We've got emails. Mine's Darian at stuffsummersays. Steve's is
Steve at stuffsummersays.com.
Yeah, always make sure .com. Make sure you put that on there. Other than that, 5 stars, thumbs up, and our Twitter handles are mine's at stuffsummersays. Steve's is
At Steve Samsel.
look at that. We're out of here. See ya.